Only one video everybody's talking about this morning is Roy Keane in the event in Ireland alongside Gary Neville, butchering Sir Alex Ferguson with some of his remarks when asked about his time at United. Um, I mean, from a Myers-Briggs perspective, I'm going to take this from a personality typology perspective because there's something that Gary Neville said that was so true, that they were so similar in so many ways, Ferguson and Keane, and that neither of them would back down. Both introverts, both lead with introverted thinking as their flow state, both which is a process that's very... it's an internal logical process that basically means that people, who use this as a flow state, they have their thoughts and ideas about things very well organised in their minds. They have like these incredible frameworks inside their head that the way things should be, what's right and what's wrong. And I think rightness is a big thing with most IPs. People that are introverts and perceivers. If IP's in the four-letter personality type, then generally there's a fixation with being right, always being right, and rightness. And that was certainly the case with both Ferguson and Keane. I think that's an easy example to use because I think everybody can see it. What also struck me about the video was that Keane, his delivery in conversation, for someone who you don't really get to see in that scenario too often, his delivery of his stories and the way he told things was so captivating. He's, you could tell that his thoughts were so organised in his mind that he knew, it's a very subjective process, but he knew in his own mind what the version of the truth was. So it kind of puts him in a position to be able to deliver it so convincingly. And I think this is the thing when people use introverted thinking as a flow state. When they go after someone, when they've got a point to make, it can seem brutal when they put the point across because it's so stands up to logic so much and is so well thought through, that basically observers on the sidelines tend to wince, that don't want to be the object of that kind of verbal brutality. So it's a very interesting video from a Myers-Briggs perspective in raising those points and making them quite clear. I wouldn't say there's an issue with this though as well. We'll talk about Roy Keane as a potential manager because he's been talking lately about wanting to get back into management and the fact that he's acknowledging mistakes he made at Ipswich. And I saw one quote where he was talking about as if he was talking to certain players as though he was scraping them off the bottom of his shoe. I think the issue with Keane as a manager in this day and age is that because he's got such an ingrained idea of what's right and wrong, what's the right or wrong way to behave on a football pitch, and how players should conduct themselves and things like that, he's not one for changing, and he's not liable to adapt to the modern day footballer, the millennial footballer, compared to the Generation X footballers, which were the dressing rooms that he populated, and that he was such a well respected and admired figure in those kinds of dressing rooms, because the mentality was entirely different. Nowadays, millennial footballers want to be educated, and they don't like to be ordered around or told what to do. Don't respond as well, to those that style of management that is just a natural thing to Keane. I think any club that ever considers taking Roy Keane on as a manager has to take a good long hard look at their own dressing room and ask themselves whether that dressing room can handle Roy Keane, because it's a recipe for disaster, to be honest, in most dressing rooms in this day and age with so many young millennial footballers. Keane will just not be able to tolerate the way things are done nowadays, and the way that young footballers, what they want from a manager. And it is a two-way relationship now. Previously it's always been the manager is the guy in charge, and that's that. And on some level, even the most rebellious players would respect that fact. And nowadays, that's just not the case at all. You know, it's a very much a two-way relationship. You talk about somebody like Steve Cooper that's come in at Swansea. He's doing very well so far at Swansea. He's, you know, been part of the setup at St George's Park with England. And he's very much about the players leading the preparation for matches. That, you know, they all sit round together and the players get to almost come up with the tactical game plan, and their idea of the best way to approach the next match isn't vital. You know, it isn't final. So Cooper might well turn around at the end and say, well, I think you're wrong, lads. This is why, and here's the way I'd go about this game. But generally speaking, the players have a very big say in how the next match is prepared for, and basically, you know, that's the very modern style of management. Players have got a much better understanding of the nuance of tactics nowadays than players in the Keane era did. Which is not to say, you know, it's the way it used to be. I'm sure there was a lot of nuance at Manchester United, for example, given everything that they won. But nowadays, at all levels of the game, right down to the very depths of League Two, players have got a very astute understanding of the finest detail of a game plan, more so than ever before, because that's been a trend in the past few years. So a manager like Steve Cooper is a great example of who. It's just hard to imagine a manager like Steve Cooper would have just sort of come out of St George's Park with no experience of you know, the day-to-day running of a football club. You know, like, you know, just his general lack of experience on his CV is purely coaching, but that's fine nowadays. And a few years ago, there'd have been a lot of stuff that, you know, there's a lot of stuff now that he doesn't understand, but there'd have been a lot of stuff that those things would have killed him as a manager, or you know, in old dressing rooms. But nowadays, he's very much the modern type of manager, whereas Roy Keane is from a different generation, and it's hard to believe that he's ever really going to take to the modern day footballer. And I just think, you know, he's probably a disaster waiting to happen if he ever went back into a dressing room. But, you know, there's no absolutes. There's not to say there's not a club out there that he could have some success with. But any club, you know, the manager's got to fit the club that he goes into. And any club that even considers taking Roy Keane on has got to take a long, hard look at the dressing room. It's got to be an extremely masculine dressing room, very straight talking, you know, that can handle that kind of straight talking approach, and just, you know, a results driven dressing room rather than one that wants to play football. You know, a lot of players these days are interested in the philosophy. They want to know the way that the game's played, and they want to understand tactics, and they want to feel like their own personal careers are being furthered by the man in charge, because he's educating them, because he's developing them, and things like that as individuals, so that when they move to a new club, they move on as better players anyway. I don't think anyone sees, you know, I don't think many players nowadays go into a club and think this is where I'm going to be for the next 10 years. They see them as individual projects. When they move on to the next club, they want to be in a better player, in a better position to earn more money and to be more valued. You know, and with a manager like Roy Keane, you know, if you're not in his plans, or if you're not serving him and the team in the right way, then, you know, you just can't imagine getting that sort of feedback from Keane. So that's kind of my take on it. But it's a very, very interesting video off the ball. You know, you go and check it out on YouTube if you haven't seen it. But yeah, it's all over the show today. And just a very interesting take, and lots of interesting angles from a Myers-Briggs perspective.